Due to the graphic nature of this program, viewer discretion is advised.
Viewers, please be advised there may be some flashing imagery. Robert John Maudsley, known as the Brain Eater, Spoons, more famously dubbed by the press Hannibal the Cannibal, is Britain's longest serving prisoner, having been incarcerated since 1974. He has killed more people inside prison than he did out, and is serving a whole life order, which will ensure he is never released. But what led to gain him such gruesome nicknames? What has caused him to have been kept in a specially constructed glass box for the past 42 years? Why is he thought to be an inspiration for Anthony Hopkins' Oscar-winning performance as the lead role in Silence of the Lambs? Is Robert John Maudsley a twisted psychopathic murderer, or a victimised child that became a vigilante killer? Let's start at the beginning. In 1953, he was the fourth born of what eventually became 12 siblings. His family lived in the Speke area, the southern outskirts of Liverpool, home to John Lennon Airport. When he was just 6 months old, along with his two older brothers Kevin and Paul, and also sister Brenda, placed into foster care of the nuns at the Roman Catholic Nazareth House. For 9 years they all lived a very happy childhood. Then his parents George and Jean, now with the fifth child, decided to reconnect with their four other children. They returned to their care. It turned out to be the start of hellish systemic abuse at the hands of his father for Robert. His older brother Paul said it was the old fellow who hit us, with his fists, belts and sometimes a stick, but our ma instigated half of it. Robert recalled how his father once locked him in a room for 6 months, with his father only coming in at various times of the day to beat him. It once again got to a point where his parents couldn't cope, and Robert, after 12 months back with his mum and dad, was fostered to another family, after his removal by social services. Unable to cope with his experience, and now a teenager, he went to London, sleeping rough on the streets and was soon addicted to drugs. To fund this, he turned to male prostitution, and in 1974, his first victim, a client called John Farrell, thought it was a good idea to show Maudsley graphic photos he had of minors he had sexually abused. This couldn't have been further from the case, as Robert instantly garroted him and then caved his head in with a hammer. The attack was extremely violent, and the police would call the victim Blue due to the colour of his face. I would have gone with Papa Smurf, but that's just me. Declared unfit to stand trial, he was institutionalised at Broadmoor Hospital for the criminally insane, the same asylum that housed Moore's murderer Ian Brady, who until his death in 2017 was the only living person incarcerated in the UK that had been there for longer than Maudsley. Reports in early 2020 suggest that Broadmoor could be revamped as a luxury hotel. It is here that he killed again, this time with an accomplice, as he and John Cheeseman barricaded themselves in a cell with a fellow patient, convicted paedophile David Francis. They proceeded for the next 9 hours to torture him until he died. He was reportedly found with his head cracked open like a boiled egg, with a spoon hanging out of it. The story of him eating the brain has been under speculation for many years. It is now thought that this didn't actually occur, which has always been backed up by the autopsy. In reality, he rammed a plastic knife into the brain via the ear canal. This resulted in his transfer to Wakefield Prison. The very next year, in his new surroundings, on the 29th of July, Robert killed 2 inmates, Sawney Darwood, who had murdered his wife, and William Roberts, who had sexually assaulted a 7-year-old girl. He first invited Darwood into his cell, and then stabbed and garroted him, then stuffed him under the bed. He then went and found his last victim, stabbing William Roberts to death in a frenzied attack. Once finished, Maudsley very calmly strutted into the security office, placed his bloodied homemade chiv on the table and said to the guard that there will be 2 short at the next roll call. This was the end of general population for Robert, and the start of his solitary confinement, it was decided that he would be housed in a bespoke cell, although it wasn't completed until 1983. Set in the bowels of Wakefield Prison, measuring 5.5 metres by 4.5 metres, this bulletproof plexiglass cell and its unique living quarters consist of a concrete slab bed, a cardboard table and chair, complete with bolted down sink and toilet. That was not a sponsored advert for Premier Inn. The cell itself, though, must be a constant reminder of his early life. He said himself in an interview, "I see this in part as going back to my childhood and going back to the room where I was detained for 6 months, and that torments me." Detail of his offending being higher in prison can be compared to Charles Bronson, another well-known, long-serving British prisoner, although Bronson has never killed anyone. Now both based at Wakefield, Bronson tried to befriend Maudsley by sending him a watch via regard. When presented with the timepiece, Robert Maudsley refused it and told them to chuck it in the bin. This infuriated Charlie and has caused a rift between the two famous prisoners ever since. Maudsley maintains that the method of isolation is counterintuitive and does nothing towards rehabilitation. I would suggest if anyone can explain the effects of solitary, it would be him. He has a very high IQ, though this must have declined with such a lack of contact with other people and things to keep him occupied or challenged mentally. He is on a 23-1 split, so only gets an hour a day outside. The rest of the time he is in his tiny cell. When escorted to the yard, he is surrounded by no less than 6 guards. He sees or interacts with no other prisoners. Prison staff have described him as quite pleasant. I can find no instances of him ever being violent towards them. However, according to Maudsley, they never really interact with him. During an interview he said, "I feel no officer takes any interest in me. Their only concern is when to open the door and when to get me back in my cell as soon as possible. I think an officer could stop and talk for a bit, but they never do." I can understand the links to Hannibal Lecter, and I think the Jonathan Demme-directed 1991 film classic Silence of the Lambs, which was adapted from the Thomas Harris novel from 3 years before, has at very least taken inspiration for the cell of Robert Maudsley in the film. Maybe of his character too, but not exclusively. It's more of a mix of a few known serial killers. It's not just based on one murderer like Ed Gein being recreated as Leatherface, which we will tackle in another video. But the main inspiration is more likely Dr. Salazar, whose real name is Alfredo Barley Trevino. In the 1960s, during a visit to interview another killer in a Mexican prison, a young Harris had been introduced to the man's doctor, a Dr. Salazar, who actually turned out to be the insane inmate Barley Trevino. In early 2000, Maudsley was unsuccessful in requests for the terms of his confinement to be relaxed or to be allowed to take a cyanide pill to end his life. Also, he asked for a pet budgie, which I guess was inspired by the 1962 film The Birdman of Alcatraz, loosely based on the true story of Robert Stroud, who broke the monotony of solitary by acquiring a sparrow. This request was also denied, along with the asking for a radio, a TV, and for board games. He is currently, as of the end of 2020, a year away from surpassing the longest ever solitary confinement, which was that of Albert Woodfox, who is featured in another one of my videos. In conclusion, I accept that we cannot all go around delivering out vigilante justice. I wouldn't normally be empathetic to a serial killer. The fact remains, it has to be taken into consideration how vile his victims were. If I was in his position with the first victim, I can say as a man with brutal honesty, I would have had the same end result. Does that make me psychotic? I am not saying he should be released, but in my opinion, his treatment has been unfair and overkill. It would not hurt anyone if this man after 42 years was given some interaction, some brain stimulus, and a relaxation of his current confinement. When you compare it to the terms of the truly evil Anders Breivik, who we will get into another video, it defies belief.